very highly successful leaders in the community. And they are Amiti Uttarwar and Mansi Patwa. So let me give you a little bit of introduction about them. Amiti will provide perspective around Bitcoin, and Mansi will provide perspective around private equity. Now, Amiti Uttarwar, she's a graduate of Carnegie Mellon University in Information Systems in 2014. She is the first known woman Bitcoin core contributor and the first woman to win 4 grants to work full-time on Bitcoin core. She was featured in the Forbes 2020 list for 30 under 30 and has won a spot in CoinDesk's most influential list for 2020. It's so impressive, Amiti. Mansi Patwa, she's a graduate of Yale University in economics in 2019. She was part of the Yale College Council Business Committee, Student Advisory Committee, Smart Women Securities, and she's done undergraduate research assistantship. Mansi is currently a private equity analyst at Carrick Capital Partners to conduct due diligence on potential investments and work with portfolio companies. You're really impressive too, Mansi. I want to thank both Amiti and Mansi from the bottom of my heart for taking time out of their busy schedule to help all our young attendees today. So without further ado, I invite Amiti and Mansi to begin the fireside chat. Welcome, Amiti and Mansi.
Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction and for having us here today.
Sure,
yes,
most welcome.
So looking forward to it, and it's great to virtually meet the entire ICC community. Thank you for taking the time to be here as well.
Wonderful.
Great. So again, thank you all for listening. We hope this is a helpful and productive conversation for you as Amiti and I share our experiences both from high school, college, and in our current career paths. The way we'll structure this is we love to start off giving you a bit of detail on our current roles and responsibilities in our careers. And then we'll take a bit of a time travel back to our high school and college days just to give some input on our experiences and words of wisdom that we would encourage young high schoolers and middle schoolers to be aware of. So we can start off with Amiti and I can share a little bit about what our day-to-day entails and what our career paths look like. Amiti, would you like to kick it off?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work as a full-time Bitcoin protocol developer. So what this means is that I spend all day looking at the protocols, which is the code and the computer logic that is defining the whole Bitcoin ecosystem. So this is very different than the way that a lot of companies, organizations, other software engineering jobs work. So I'm going to start by taking a step back and talking a little bit about what Bitcoin is and how Bitcoin works and what's compelled me. And so then I'll loop back into how that relates to my day-to-day. So Bitcoin, is often in the news, up and down. It's hard to discern what's noise and what's real and exactly what it is. So let me put it in a way that's quite straightforward. Bitcoin is money. What makes it different than other kinds of money, whether it be the US dollar or rupees, or other fiat currencies, or there's also gold, or we have a lot of different types of money that we use in this day and age, such as credit cards and banks representing transactions. But the thing that makes Bitcoin different is that it's censorship resistant money. So what I mean by that is a fundamental principle of Bitcoin is that no entity can prevent another entity from participating in the system. And this is very different than the kinds of monies that we've seen in our digital age. It's very similar to the monies that predate digital. So gold is a similar way where if one person hands over a bar of gold to another person, unless someone is physically present, which is obviously going to be challenging, they can't prevent that transaction from happening. But in our digital ecosystem, in the current prevalent monetary systems that we use, this is all based on systems of trust. So in America, for example, in order to open a bank account, you need to have proof of address, and you need to demonstrate your age, you need to demonstrate that you have a permanent residence that is within this country. There's several different things that the banks use to identify whether or not you're trustworthy to get this account, which allows you to participate in the ecosystem. So it's a network of trust that expands outward. And in Bitcoin, it's kind of the reverse principle of anybody can participate, and that's a fundamental idea. So the way this works is through decentralization. So that means that there's the protocol, which is very comparable to the internet protocols. So the internet protocols that we use are like TCP/IP, and there's a lot of layers of it. But what that means is anyone, anywhere in the world, if you're able to connect, you can get onto a web page. You can trust that if you're on your, if you're making a credit card transaction, or if you're sharing a chat conversation with a friend, that it's going to be private. You can participate, even if it's via different websites or different companies. You can participate in this open protocol that is across the board homogeneous. And so with Bitcoin, it's similar. Rather than the banks keeping track of who has how much money, we use this decentralized method where every single person who's participating in the system keeps track of who has how much money. And how we do that tracking, how we make sure that each participant is able to keep up, and every time a transaction happens, update the correct ledgers, and make sure you're connected to the network. All the specifics of that is contained to the Bitcoin protocol and a software implementation that adheres to that protocol. So what that looks like on a day-to-day basis for me, I have the privilege of having a lot of freedom with what projects I work on. So I personally really have gravitated towards the peer-to-peer network, which has a lot to do with what messages do I send, how do I interpret the messages I receive, and how do I make sure that I'm not vulnerable to any sort of attack that would mean that I don't know when there are transactions happening. And so I go really, really deep into the technical specifics of all of this. I hang out in a lot of code. I'm on GitHub or on my own computer. I write code, I write tests, I review other people's code. I have long conversations about what we think would happen in different sorts of circumstances, and however unlikely, whether it's that the pipeline that carries internet between different continents were to break, or if there was a wall around China, for example, and we can no longer rely on internet, what would happen, and how would this technology be able to continue providing the functionality of money to people? So it's a lot of really, really detailed technical choices, but it ties into really big pictures. And what I enjoy about it is I really like using the logic and problem solving of thinking about the specific questions. And I feel like the work is very impactful because I truly believe that Bitcoin has the ability to redefine how we view wealth, and potentially do it in a way that's much more fairly distributed. It doesn't mean that just because you're from X country, you can't participate in the financial ecosystem of Y nation, or things, other kinds of things that you've been born into or don't have control over. And so I think that it would be really cool to see what a world that is fundamentally revolves around a society that has a more equal financial system that everyone can participate in. So that keeps me very motivated. So yeah, that's my overview of what it's like to work on Bitcoin on a daily basis. I'd love to hear from you now of what captures your interest about private equity, and what do your day-to-days look like?
Sure, happy to give an overview. So to give a bit of background, in the investing world, I like to think of there as being three categories. There's venture capital investing, private equity investing, and then of course, public markets investing. Venture capital typically focuses on early stage startups. A lot of the ecosystem in Silicon Valley has historically been geared towards that category. So how do you provide effective capital to small startups that need it to either build up their R&D, enter new geographies as customer markets, hire a really talented or sales organization, et cetera. Public markets investing, of course, is something that any of us can participate in if we are individual investors. And at the same time, there are firms dedicated towards public market investing. So they will spend their time deciding which public stocks, ETFs, mutual funds are likely to grow in the near term and where they see a market opportunity. And then they will invest either their own money or clients' money to help with their portfolios. I sit in the intersection of those. I work in private equity. And the way I like to describe private equity is investing in companies that are kind of at the mid stage of their growth, where they're either seeking a recap of their existing cap table, and I'll describe what that means, or they're looking for an infusion of capital to really accelerate their growth for the next stage. So a recap means existing investors may be seeking an exit opportunity. So perhaps they've been in a company for 4 to 5 years and they're looking for an opportunity to take that money out because they think they've contributed to the business sufficiently. Or maybe they're looking to just simply change the percentage of that company they own. I really sit in the latter category I mentioned, which is growth capital. So we typically will invest in companies that maybe already have investments and have reached a sizable amount of revenue already, but need a partner as well as the capital to really take them to the next stage. So for some companies, that may mean needing capital to really build a new software product, which is what we hear a lot about in Silicon Valley. Or maybe it means using that capital to really drive the operations team of the company, which they see as pivotal to their next stage of growth. My day-to-day involves a combination of looking for investment opportunities, working on those investment opportunities, and then actually working on very strategic projects with the companies you've invested in across our portfolio. Currently, I concentrate on 4 areas of investment. I look at healthcare, education technology, financial technology, or fintech. So Bitcoin is very applicable there. And then artificial intelligence / machine learning. So I spend quite a bit of time studying those sectors, understanding what's the major tailwinds and headwinds in those areas, creating market analyses, and then my favorite part, which is actually working with individual companies to see what we think their 5 and 10-year growth plan might look like. So I think it's a great way to combine analytical skills, quantitative reasoning with passions for certain sectors. So it's a great role for someone who's looking to gain both depth and breadth in all of those areas. Great, so that's a little bit about me. So now we're going to take all of you down a trip to memory lane to talk a little bit about our foundations and what we experienced in high school. So Amiti, maybe we can start off talking about when you were in high school, what were some subjects or areas that were particularly interesting to you? And at that time, what did you see your career path as being?
Yeah, so I always really gravitated towards math and computer science. I've always loved all sorts of puzzles and games and logic thinking, and that was the way that it manifested through my coursework in high school and college. But I really didn't know what my career trajectory would look like. Obviously, these are areas that were ripe with jobs, so I kept pursuing them. But I also dabbled in a lot of different activities. I remember participating heavily in newspaper and journalism, as well as doing a film club. And it was really interesting to nurture the different sides of myself and experiment with, more creative avenues, but also learn what I really enjoyed, or at what point would I be bored or unwilling to take the consequence or accept the full picture of certain pursuits. I knew that I had a gravitation towards being a software engineer, but I think early on, I thought that I would probably go down more of a managerial, maybe project management, or a track that had to do with more humans, because honestly, when I was in high school, I was most socially inclined of trying to understand, and just wanted to hang out with my friends and had no clue how that would turn into a career. So it's been an interesting journey to look back and see where I've landed now. Definitely, there were some signs, but I think it's stronger in hindsight. Whereas at the time, I was experimenting with different avenues and trying to figure out what sorts of things I thrived with. What about you?
Yeah, so my situation was similar. I actually took an 8th grade economics class at my school. And I think that was my first foray into the subject. And I found it really interesting because it was a great combination of quantitative skills with qualitative analyses. So I remember we had a project which was looking at the supply and demand of a consumer toy company. And it was really exciting because not only are you building graphs and using formulas to calculate that, but you're also using anecdotes and what you know about toy purchasing behaviors. So that was really interesting. And then a few years went by in high school, and I actually didn't take any economics classes, but I was involved in a couple of organizations that brought my econ interests to light. So I was one of the presidents of our speech and debate team. And I also served as editor of our justice awareness section of the newspaper. And so in both of those activities, economics concepts were thrown all the time. In speech and debate, I did an activity called extemporaneous speaking, which was you get a topic at a tournament and you have roughly 30 minutes to prepare a memorized speech on that topic. And then you will present it within a 7-minute time limit. And I would always gravitate for the of a stimulus package or the effects of a stimulus package. And so that really not only was a great way for me to flesh out my thoughts on economic theory, but it really emphasized that this was an interest area for me. On the newspaper side, in justice awareness, of course, as Amity mentioned, equal distribution of wealth has unfortunately always been a issue in our society. And so I frequently covered and researched topics pertaining to social justice and how can we create economic opportunities for the developing world, whether that's India or otherwise. And so those experiences in combination told me that economics would be interesting for me. I think also relevant was I tried to read as much as possible outside of the classroom. I think aside from books, I really like magazines like Time, the Wall Street Journal, and I felt like they're good ways to not only test your thinking, but also to be informed on, okay, what does the real world application of economics look like aside from the textbooks? So that was really helpful. And Amity, if you think about your experience in high school, naturally in computer science and software, things are always changing and the technology is always evolving. So were there any resources or ways that you develop your knowledge or your interests outside of school?
I mean, my general philosophy on computer science and programming in this day and age is that the tools will always be changing, but the principles aren't. So I was fortunate to have a lot of access to some pretty current advanced topics in high school for programming and computer science, which was really cool and I was able to enjoy. But I think what's most important is figuring out both the mindset, because if you have enough curiosity, you could figure anything out. It's whether or not you have the curiosity and the willpower. And so I think for me, when it comes to a specific, and then there's particular kinds of computer problems that I gravitate towards when there's things that are more infrastructure and observing these computer systems, kind of poking at them from different angles, I have a lot harder of a time with those kinds of problems. Whereas, so sometimes the hardest week of class would always be the first one, where you have to set up your computer and set up the software. Because when something broke, I didn't know what to do. But for me, what I really enjoyed was like thinking in algorithms, because I love that logic and it just feels like a big game to me. So I think the most valuable thing, I doubt I realized this at the time, but in hindsight, the most valuable thing is developing that critical skill set of how to think about problems and where to look. Like if I'm stuck, how do I move forward? And there's always multiple branches of possibility. And as I've grown older, as I've gained experience, I see more of those branches. Whereas earlier in my school or career, I was looking to people who are more experienced than me, because I felt stuck, and they would have to reveal, okay, here are possibilities of debugging, for example. So in hindsight, I think the most valuable thing to learn is the fundamental principles, which is much more relevant through any tools that might be changing, any languages or programming, of how to think about problems, how to break them down into achievable tasks. And, you know, talking like this, I think it becomes pretty quickly apparent that this goes beyond computer science in specific. It's like turning goals into achievable steps is one of the biggest life skills that I've learned. So I don't know how much of it was at what points in life, but how to bridge that gap between what I'm doing right now for the next 5 minutes or 30 minutes or daytime to add up to the things that I actually want to achieve in life. And I think those are the biggest takeaways when I look back.
Great.
What about you? What stands out for you?
Yeah, I think in high school, there were a couple of things pertaining both to choosing a field and choosing a college that I think are helpful to know. One is gaining leadership experience, but not necessarily only in the traditional sense of being president or being editor or leading a club. I think it just means taking initiative to explore something that's your passion. So I think various high schools have very great opportunities to do that. So for example, if someone is interested in biology, then I would recommend that even a high schooler take initiative to either, you know, reach out to a biology teacher at their school and learn more about the subject. Of course, join biology-based organizations, maybe speak to people in the industry proactively to understand what a career in biology looks like. I think those are all forms of leadership that anyone can participate in. And I think it's pretty fundamental both in high school and later in life as you flesh out your career and your path of study. And I think the second thing that I would say about high school is I think exposure is very important. I know in high school it's easy to focus a lot on college admissions and, you know, looking at what's next, but the more exposure you can get to different career paths, different ideas, different majors, the better suited you will be for success both in college and afterwards. So for example, for me, I actually did an internship before my senior year of high school, working in marketing. And that was a great way not only for me to get some exposure to the corporate environment, but to also understand, okay, what kinds of roles do I like? What don't I like? What skills are required for something in marketing versus something that's more quantitative, and what's a better fit for me? Great. So
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And playing off of that, I think something that was really valuable in high school for me is figuring out what I don't like. It was less clear, okay, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, but I was able to start removing options that I definitely didn't. So two options I removed personally was anything to do with biology. I did not have the mind or the stomach. I realized I definitely don't want to be a doctor. and similarly, I mentioned participating in film club. And that was something that I thought, ooh, maybe this could be a passion of mine, putting together a film, there's a lot of elements that are technical, there's elements that are human and creative. And so that was something I was able to explore through a club where we made a film. We went through all the steps. We wrote a script and we made some storyboards and we figured out how to shoot them and edit them. We went through all the whole process of even though we were all doing this for the first time. And there I learned that this is not something that I have the patience and willingness to commit in the very long term of doing this. But it's funny because one of the friends who we did that with learned that he actually adores it. And he ended up going to USC for film school all through this project that I think I kind of sparked that and was the lead of the club. I guess president is the word. It's been a while, but I was the president of a club. And for me, it was a learning lesson that this isn't something I want to do in the long term. But for one of my friends, it was a learning lesson that, okay, this is something I want to get much deeper into. So I think that I agree with that exposure idea of in these young stages, like trying different things out, because it's not easy to know exactly what the ins and out of different fields, of different industries, of different types of work are, until you try it out and you realize, okay, these are my favorite parts, these are my least favorite parts. Am I willing to deal with that? But another element I'll add is that just remember that you have a lot of time. You don't have to try everything out all at the same time. You can spend 1 year where you explore one hobby and the next year exploring another. And even if you don't get to everything in high school, you have college and then the rest of your life. I think that's very hard to understand when you're young. And as you get older, understanding that things can be one at a time and doing each thing fully rather than trying to juggle a dozen different things and doing them all half-heartedly is gonna just be much more informative, much more satisfying, and teach you the life skills that will allow you to excel no matter what the content is, rather than trying to do everything all at the same time, which I know it's hard because saying no is one of the hardest, most important things of how do you really make sure you commit to the proper, commit to things that you can see through fully and say no to other things that you're not 100% in. So explore, but try to experience some patience around it too, would be my tips back to my high school self.
That's great. Thank you. Those are great points. And as we transition a little bit away from high school and think about college, I know one topic that's on everyone's minds is probably, of course, how do you choose a school, but also how do you choose what to study? So I guess from what you can remember, what drove you to choose CMU and specifically your major in information systems? And thinking back, do you have any tips for what you might have done differently or things that really were highlights of your experience at CMU?
Yeah, honestly, choosing a college was such a tough choice. And it wasn't that I was stuck between options or anything like that. I just had no clue. It's like, okay, I have to choose something that is the next 4 years of my life that's going to greatly impact the rest of my life. And how do I even start? And so I mostly actually applied to a bunch of things. And then I really leaned into my parents who just had a much wider perspective and knew me really well to help me figure out like, okay, here are my acceptances, where should I go? And because of that interest that I mentioned a little bit earlier of both computer science and logic, but thinking about human interactions and human systems, and that I was like much more socially inclined, my parents suggested that I might really enjoy this information systems major at Carnegie Mellon, because the premise of the major is that it's where does business meet computer science? So how do you build the right system, like the right technical solution for a particular business problem? So you start with something high level and then you break it down into something you can execute to build the system.
And so it had this kind of pragmatic tone that, and my parents did a lot of research around like what the work would look like, and just this level of depth. I'm very, very fortunate that they were able to do this and are willing to. But they helped me in that choice. So I don't have a great answer other than being really lucky. But I think it's also things will work out the way they're meant to. And in hindsight, I can't imagine a different life trajectory, you know? How about you? How did you choose your college and major?
Yeah, great. And thank you for your answer there. My case is similar. We're very grateful to parents for their support and their guidance and their recognition of strengths and weaknesses that I myself wasn't aware of. For me, I was looking for a couple of things. First, I wanted a program that had strengths in the social sciences, but that took a quantitative approach to the social sciences. So, for example, I wanted a program where I could study economics, but learn a lot of the theory and the quantitative basis for that, because I believe that kind of similar to computer science, where the tools might keep changing. I believe if you know the conceptual background very well, that never becomes outdated. So I was looking for programs with that. Second, I really valued quality of intellectual discourse in a college environment. And I know at the surface, it seems like, well, every college is going to have good intellectual discourse, but I was specifically looking for an environment where students had strong intellectual curiosity, where at dinner and in class, people would bring really interesting ideas to the table. And this was both because it's something that I enjoy and something that I thought would make me a smarter, more knowledgeable individual. And I really think college is one of the best opportunities to get that. So I applied early to Yale and was fortunate enough to be accepted, and decided to go there. I also thought that having access to New York and Yale's ties to the financial industry would be a great segue for that career path. Ultimately, choosing economics, as I mentioned, I kind of always had an interest in the economics major, but I really confirmed that it would be my area of study because I saw that not only would I get that quantitative foundation, but I could specialize in a really flexible way. So I decided about halfway through my college career that investing would be a great path for me. So I tailored my coursework to be focused on private investing, public investing, understanding specific end markets. So for example, healthcare is something I really enjoyed learning about. So I took, excuse me, classes focused on the business and science of medicine, for example, you know, like how does a pharmaceutical company work? How does a biotech, excuse me, how does a biotech company operate, and how can you really understand the business models of those businesses from an investor perspective? I think thinking back to my college experience, I had a really wonderful time. I think the biggest takeaways from college for me are, first, really take advantage of the diversity of coursework available to you, regardless of where you go. Most colleges will give you flexibility to take classes outside of your core major. And it's really the last time where you can get all of those courses available to you in that 4-year period. And not only do you meet really smart people that way, but I think you learn things that are very unique. So for example, I took classes on the structure of networks. So understanding kind of the math basis of networks, very niche topic that combines graph theory with an understanding of real life networks, but something that now is just a very helpful class that I have in my pocket. I also took classes, you know, in international relations, in biology, just to really build my repertoire. And I think that was a really valuable experience. The second thing I would say is college is, again, a time of exploration. I would recommend participating in various clubs and organizations that are connected to the real world community. So maybe those are clubs geared towards working in, say, software engineering. Maybe there are clubs geared at doing community service. I think not only does that help you understand what real life applications of your major might look like, but you get to engage with companies and communities that ultimately you might want to work in. So that would be my advice there. I know we have about 2 minutes left, so I guess one closing question for the both of us. What skills do you think are most important to your current career path? Whether that's, knowledge or a drive or something that's high level.
Yeah. So I answer this question often because I working on this open source protocol. I work with grants, and a lot of people who are exploring it are, okay, how do I know if it would be a good fit for me? And honestly, I think the biggest thing is just the willingness of, I sit down at my computer and I have a really good time. I mean, there's good days, there's bad days, but when I get in the code, and I love the experience of being really confused and then just untangling all of the things and figuring out what's going on. It's extremely satisfying for me. But I know that many of my friends, family, other people cannot imagine just sitting down by themselves and staring at their computer screen for 3 hours straight. So I think the most important thing is that deep willingness, not just to have achieved the goal, but the ability to enjoy the way to finding the solutions. And similarly, there's a lot of things like what creates energy versus what depletes you, and finding jobs that the most of your time is doing those energy creation types of activities versus having to do things that you find exhaust you, So I think that applies for me as well. What about you?
Awesome. I agree with both of those. And I think I'll add my a few incremental thoughts. I think the first is that having a practice makes perfect mentality is particularly important in private equity, but I think in any career. So just like growing up, our parents might have said, you need to play the piano for 15 minutes every day in order to be good. That applies to everything else as well. So for example, being an investor requires, learning how to value a business, practicing evaluating business models, practicing understanding what a good management team looks like. And that's something that you have to be open to doing and open to learning each time. And the second thing I think is important for success in private equity investing is a willingness to learn. I often say that I feel like I learn something new every single day of my job. There's always some new idea, a new approach to solving a problem that comes up. And I think being open to that and having the ability to digest that new information can really make you successful.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mansi and Amiti. You both were absolutely terrific. I think you gave some really valuable nuggets of information to our young viewers. I would love to find, what are the key takeaways that you want to leave our young audience with? So I'll begin with Amiti. If you could give us 3 takeaways, and then I'll ask you, Mansi. So if you could let us know.
Sure. Yeah. So my first one would be a general attitude that I still work on a daily basis is to try to be more curious and less judgmental, whether it's about yourself, others, your career path, like just trying to understand why, how, and it really creates a very open mindset. It's natural as humans to try to make snap judgments and then stick with those. And I found the more open-minded I can be and the more curious I can be, like wisdom comes at me from all directions. My second one is in these early phases of life, really seeking like, what is your superpower? What feels like play to you, but looks like work to others? Because everybody has this thing. You can look at 5-year-old kids. I mean, I recently got a puppy and she sometimes will work so hard at a specific activity. It might be digging a hole, but her whole body and spirit will be in it. And honestly, if I had to dig a hole, like that sounds like a lot of work. So kind of, what is your superpower? And as you're growing up, what really satisfies you and excites you, but looks like work to other people? because leaning into those things will set you up for a lifetime of success. And seeing those little nuggets, because they're already there in your life right now. And then the third one, to reiterate what we've been talking about, is use this phase to explore. I totally agree that college provides an opportunity to take courses that otherwise you really wouldn't find yourselves in, or even in high school clubs and things. Use the time to explore. Again, loops back to curiosity. But remember that you have a lot of time. It doesn't need to all happen at this very moment. And even if it doesn't happen for the next decade, you'll have multiple more decades. So, you know, don't get too stressed out thinking that you have to do it all right now, but just try to do one thing at a time and explore new things and learn about yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amiti. Mansi, how about you?
Sure, and thanks, Amiti, for your points as well. So my 3 takeaways would be: first, mentorship and having a good network is important at all stages of life. I think for a high schooler or middle schooler, that can come in the form of course, your parents, but also seniors at your school, alumni of your institution, family, friends. Having that drive to really seek the advice and input of others will carry you forward in every phase of your life. And you'll hear it throughout your career that a network is one of the most important predictors of your success. So I encourage students to adopt that mentality early on. And the way I would seek mentorship can be in a very informal way, right? Maybe it means texting your dad's best friend's daughter about how she liked a certain class in high school, or how she liked a company she interned at. And that can build a relationship over time. My second piece of advice is, it's very important to be self-reflective and engaging your individual strengths and weaknesses. I think a lot of the times we have certain strengths and inclinations that get overshadowed maybe by what we think we should be studying or what we think we should be pursuing, but constantly thinking about, okay, what do I not only like, but where do I thrive, can not only help you choose the right major or career, but help you choose side projects and endeavors that will really be the best fits for you. So for example, for me, that meant understanding that I love reading, I love thinking critically about high-level social problems and economic theories. So, okay, private equity is a great fit for that. For others, it might mean thinking about how much they like working with people, and therefore working in medicine might be a great fit for them, so on and so forth. My final takeaway would be, it's a bit of a nuanced one, but I think being an organized individual in aspects of your life can help you. And that doesn't mean having a notebook and taking notes. It just means thinking consciously about your previous accomplishments, what your goals are, maybe in 5 to 10 years. And I think that can not only help you decide what you need to do to reach your goals, but can also help you think about what you've done so far and what you liked and didn't like. I think that's helped me well, and I would encourage everyone to do similar.
Those are excellent takeaways. And I think they'll really help our young audience to understand how they can, identify what their passion is and how they can make sure that they have an exciting career like both of you. So one of the questions that our audience has asked us is, did either of you play sports?
I played some group sport, I played basketball in high school, not a ton in college, and now I really like mountain activities, so rock climbing, ice climbing, backpacking. So they're not really sports, but do nurture the physical elements as well.
Wonderful. What about you, Mansi?
So I did play soccer when I was in elementary school. I dabbled in a few items such as that. In high school, I did not focus on any sports teams. But now from time to time, I like to play badminton and golf for fun.
Wonderful. The other question is, are you considering applying to a master's program? And do you recommend working before pursuing master's? So Amiti and then Mansi.
So this is a funny one because my parents were extremely encouraging of me going to a master's program after I finished undergrad. but I felt very strongly that what would be more appropriate for me in life is to go and work in, in the world and experience that. I think I'd be very open to going back and doing a master's or other higher education, but I wanted to have grounding of real world problems, and personally. So I think everybody, there's different people have a different fit for what makes sense in their lives. But for me, I just wanted the exposure and to see like real world problems, to find out if there were any that captured my interest enough to go dig into them via academia. It's cool because I found a role where my work now is kind of right on the edge of industry versus academia. I work a lot like PhD students who have large projects and have their own ownership around how they spend their time, how they work towards those projects, but then they have to defend and promote what their findings are. And so even though I am technically in industry, I work on a software project that's deployed out in the wild, I have found a niche in this world that kind of walks that line of what I like about each element. Like I like having to think about really big long-term problems and having a lot of freedom in the way that I think about them. But I also like the pragmatism of people are using this thing today. And so the work I do directly impacts how users experience it. So I'm still curious to find out whether or not I'll go back to higher education, but I'm very content with the path my life has taken so far. What about you, Mansi?
Sure. So in private equity investing, the most traditional master's program would be an MBA. And it is certainly something I think about. Typically, students will work for, individuals will work for 2 to 5 years before pursuing an MBA program. And I agree with that approach for a couple of reasons. I think first, you can get the most out of an MBA program if you've been in a corporate working environment where you understand how businesses work, and you also have exposure to different departments, so that you can decide whether you would like to do a more marketing focused MBA, finance focused MBA, tech focused MBA, etc. I also think working for that time period actually helps you understand whether you would like to pivot your career in any way. So many people use the MBA as a chance to reposition themselves. So an example would be if I decided to move from private equity investing to consulting. So working in industry for a while and deciding whether it's a good fit for you is great. And then you can really take full advantage of the MBA programs. To give a bit of detail on what the MBA application process actually looks like, there are programs that will take you right after college, but typically you will apply, 3 to 4 years after you've started working, and they're looking for items such as a good GMAT score, of course, good undergraduate record, and then really just evidence of taking leadership in your work environment or outside of the workplace.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amiti and Mansi. The other question is that what would you recommend, for a 12-year-old who might be interested in both, either of your fields? What do you think they can do in the summer?
Sure.
Because they say summers are really important, right? So, I mean, what guidance would you give them?
Sure. So one advice I would have for investing is there are actually a lot of classes, both in-person camps and online, where you can kind of get an introduction to what investing really means. Basic things like what is a stock? What is a bond? What does it mean to participate in the stock market? How do you evaluate a public company investment? No names are coming to mind right now, but they are out there. Even some websites like Coursera will have these classes, and they're quite engaging. They're taught by professors at really great institutions, or people from industry. I think that's a great way to understand whether you like the subject area. I would also encourage candidly reading a lot of the publications I mentioned. So, for example, the Wall Street Journal is not teaching you anything per se, but it's a good way for a 12-year-old to understand do I like these concepts? Do I find it interesting to understand how the markets move? That would be my recommendation. In high school, I would certainly recommend doing an internship or an externship. So for example, you could shadow somebody in my position to get a sense of whether it's a good fit for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mansi. What about you, Amiti?
Yeah, similarly for computer science, I think that there's a lot of different avenues for exploring. So you can either, I know I went to a lot of summer programming courses, and that was what validated for me that it was something that I enjoyed, because I always had a really good time. And then they create the coursework and projects, and you know, you get to make friends, etc. Alternatively, another route would be just identifying a specific project. So at this point, you could, for example, say, I'm going to make a phone app that plays a Sudoku game, or you know, choose your favorite. And then there's so much material online. So you really need to kind of scope it to something specific and achievable, that, and I recommend having it be something really fun. I remember in 8th grade, like I made with a couple friends for a computer science class, we made a project that was just Candyland. And that was really fun because it was cool to see it come together. So picking a project of either a phone app or a web app, like something that would be very exciting. And then having that be the direction, and then having more self-guided learning would also be an option based on the specific individual and what works better. I think I personally thrived at those ages in the more social environments of getting to learn with friends, but I know other people thrived in more having more independence. So
Wonderful, wonderful.
lots of
That is-
options.
That's great. Thank you so much, Amiti. Now, this brings us to our last question, which is, what are the things that kept you awake and stressed you in high school? And now that you look back upon those days, what advice would you give to your younger teen self?
Okay, I can kick this one off. What stressed me out, honestly, is what my friends thought about me. And like definitely some elements of, will I get into college, or, you know, will my family think I'm a failure? So there was a lot of social trying, like maneuvering and understanding. And if I could talk to my high school self, I would just say, take a deep breath and look at what's really important to you. If your family loves you, you know, if your friends are real friends, then they also love you and they're going to stick with you. And what you need to do is figure out what's the way for you to joyfully contribute to this world, rather than just stressing out about these hyper-specific social interactions, because you won't even remember them in 10 years, you know?
That's fabulous. Thank you, Amiti. I know, you know, these kind of challenges then can take a life of their own and be very consuming. And it's wonderful that you've addressed that. And something I hope no young kid ever has to deal with. But if they do, then, you know, that's a wonderful way to think about it. So thank you so much, Amiti. What about you, Mansi?
Right. So I think candidly, the biggest thing was, you know, getting into a good college, right? And getting the grades and the accolades to support that. And I think that's a common concern that everyone has. But something I did back then, and I would still recommend people do now, is to think about it in context of what's your goal in 10 years, and recognizing that going to a good college or, you know, getting that award at a debate tournament is not the only path to achieving that. There are many paths to reaching that common goal and many paths to success. And ultimately, the biggest thing is your drive and your desire to learn and your motivation. I think thinking back, I would also tell high schoolers that honestly, what's more important is who you want to be. You know, and especially in the Bay Area, we hear a lot about going to a brand name school or, you know, going into certain career paths, but really it's important to know yourself and choose a career that makes you happy and fulfilled. So I would almost recommend spending more time thinking about that than thinking about the college. And that will probably be a better path to success.
Thank you so much, Amiti and Mansi. We're just so grateful that you took out the time to, guide our young audience and help them in this really important journey of identifying what they can do in college and, making high school a joyful experience and making sure that they find a career that's really going to be exciting to them. So thank you so very much. And we look forward to you staying connected with us, because if our audience has any more questions, we'll just reach out to you and request you to answer those questions. So thank you so much.